I would now like to invite Mr. Sachin Gopalan, co-founder of the Indonesia Education Forum, to host the next panel. Sachin?
Thank you. Thank you, Shweta. First of all, thank you very much, Shweta. I think this is going very well. We have very, very interesting speakers. And the input of the speakers, I believe, is very important for the topic that we're going to talk about now in the panel, which is upgrading the national curriculum. Some of the reasons why upgrading the curriculum has only been accelerated because of the pandemic. It has forced us to relook, rethink, reimagine where we are going with preparation of youth for the future. And I think this discussion today may be a little bit more tech-oriented, but we have covered all aspects of the upgrading of the curriculum because tech is a part of it. There is an overall holistic approach to where the curriculum needs to go. And I think the panel today has a good mix. Ibu Inga or Dr. INGGRIANI, as I know her, she is a fantastic example of carrying out programs that are actually reaching teachers. She has 22,000 teachers in our program with Google, and it's fantastic. I think Ibu, what you're doing is actually making a difference at the ground, grassroots level, which is I think one of the key ways that we will be able to go all across Indonesia. SHWETA has been with us. In fact, she used to live in Indonesia, and she has never forgotten Indonesia, as she encouraged us to make Indonesia one of the countries, 30 countries that have been chosen by Intel to be AI ready with its youth. And I think Intel's program in India is very, very successful. I personally went and visited what SHWETA has been doing there. And she has been instrumental in creating this program across, I think now 15 countries. So there is a very interesting component of what AI can do here, because AI is not actually just about tech. It's about influencing everything we do. Even music, even languages, even history, everything has got AI in it. So we find that is one technology that cuts across all barriers and can get into anything we do, and which sometimes robotics and some of the more techie subjects are not able to do. So it's a very fantastic platform. We'll talk a little bit more about it. And then we have Anindito, or as we like to call him, Panino, who has consented to be here. Panino is actually the person who is behind this curriculum upgrade. He's been working very closely with Pamantri's team, Panadim's team, and he has been putting together a framework for the curriculum upgrade. As we know, it's not a one-time thing, right? Curriculum has to be upgraded continuously, and it is sometimes to be upgraded in steps, because you can't do a complete change in curriculum immediately. There has to be a phased way of how you would build the curriculum going forward. So we're very fortunate to have these key speakers. And I think, Panino, I'm going to invite you to go first. I believe you have a presentation to share with us that will set the framework for the discussion, because I think what we need to talk about is an approach strategy. I know both Ibu Inga working with, giving inputs on the informatics strategy in Indonesia, and SHWETA has already done this in India. She has already put AI and related curriculum into the national curriculum of CBSE board in India. So she's been through that process, and she's seen the ups and downs and difficulties there. So we can share a lot and learn from each other's experiences. So Panino, over to you, Pa. I'm going to ask you to present. I think you have screen share. Please confirm it's working. Perfect.
Yes. Is it visible?
Yes, Pa. Go ahead, Pa.
Great. Terima kasih banyak, Pak Sahin. Thank you so much, Pak Sahin. It's an honor to be part of this esteemed panel. Allow me to start by sharing some thoughts about the ministry's current approach to curriculum reform. I will do so by talking about two things. So first, I will elaborate on several key tensions which I believe define curriculum design anywhere, and the need to prioritize student learning in resolving these tensions. After that, I will also elaborate on what exactly prioritizing student learning means for curriculum design. Okay, so the curriculum is a contested field. I think that is the first thing that we need to acknowledge as curriculum designers. Policy making is not just a technical process. It is not simply finding the best optimal solution from a technical, objective perspective. Rather, policy making has a very strong social and political dimension. It is always value laden, and it always involves a tug of war between various stakeholders with different values, different interests, and hence different agendas. This, I believe, applies even more so with regards to curriculum reform. I mean, critics of curriculum reform like to say that tinkering with the curriculum is futile. Changing the curriculum, they say, will have no effect on the quality of teaching and learning. But actually, those very same people care a lot about changes to the curriculum. And this is because they know, and everyone knows, that the curriculum is a powerful conceptual infrastructure. Once it is in place, the curriculum sets the direction, the scope, the speed, and the sequence of teaching. It has a powerful influence on what and how teachers teach, and hence on how and what students ultimately learn. And therefore, yes, we have to take into account best practices, empirical evidence, latest theories about teaching and learning in designing the curriculum. But there is no escaping the socio-political dimension of curriculum reform. The contestation of values needs to be navigated. Now, more specifically, this contestation can be expressed in terms of four key tensions. The first tension is between continuity and change. Any curriculum serves to preserve societal values, traditions of the past. But on the other hand, a curriculum should also anticipate an unknown future, which often means preparing for change, and hence it requires novelty and future-oriented thinking as well. The second tension is between the collective and the individual. Here, any curriculum serves to provide students with social and cultural roots. We all need to know where we come from. Right? This will be the basis of our collective identity as a society, as a nation. But on the other hand, every curriculum should also honor students' individuality, their uniqueness, their potentials as individuals, which do not necessarily conform to the ideals of society. So that's another tension that needs to be resolved. Third, there is a tension between going wide and going deep. We want students to have a lot of knowledge, but only in passing? Or would it be better for students to learn about fewer topics, but in more depth? I know that in theory, perhaps all of us in this forum would agree that it is much better to go for depth. But in practice, this is not an easy choice to make, because every single topic in the curriculum are there for a reason. Every single subject matter has their own advocates. Last, there is the tension between control and autonomy. Right? The government's tendency is to control, is to have oversight over the education process. But how much flexibility should the government give to teachers and schools to develop their school level curriculum? Right? Obviously, the government cannot standardize everything. One size fits all doesn't work in education. Again, this is not an easy tension to resolve. So the question is, how should we resolve these tensions? How can we find the right balance? Unfortunately, maybe there is no right balance, objectively speaking, because what constitutes the right balance will depend on the values we choose to prioritize. And in Merdeka Belajar, we do have this value. Kemendikbud, the ministry, chooses to give primacy to student learning and well-being. This is our main value in the design of the curriculum and in many of our priority programs. Okay, now what are the implications for curriculum design? When we say that we prioritize student learning and well-being, what implications does it have on curriculum design? Well, in general, it means that we need to think seriously from the student's perspective, from their needs, their aspirations. We need to honor their agency and autonomy as learners. Specifically, first, this means that we need to recognize that deep learning requires a lot of time. It takes time. Decades of research into student learning tells us that developing deep understanding never comes easy. Whatever is worth learning doesn't come easy. And this is because learning requires relearning and in many, many cases, also unlearning. In mathematics, for example, to learn about fraction requires to unlearn some of our intuitions about whole numbers. In physics, learning about Newton's laws of motion requires unlearning about the intuitions we have about how the physical world around us works. In the humanities, we learn about other cultures and languages, and this requires us to unlearn the knowledge we have about our mother tongue, and maybe also the prejudices we have about the values and traditions of other cultures. So without deep understanding, without going through this difficult process of unlearning and relearning, knowledge of a topic is rarely useful outside the short-term need to pass school examination. So the implication for curriculum design is very clear. We should prioritize depth over breadth. Curriculum content hence needs to be reduced and refocused on the essentials. Again, this will not be easy. Second, we need to recognize that our kids, our children, our students have a long future ahead of them, hopefully much, much longer than our lifetimes. With a rapid pace of social, cultural, technological, economic change, students will need to go through the process of learning, relearning, unlearning throughout their life. And hence the curriculum should focus on powerful transversal competencies. These are competencies that are foundational and applicable to many contexts. These are the competencies which Bu Inge spoke about and previous speakers have highlighted: computational thinking, problem solving, self-regulated learning, critical thinking, collaborating with people from different disciplines and different cultural backgrounds. The implication for curriculum reform is again very clear. We need to prioritize competencies that are transferable over content knowledge. And third, students have different starting points in their learning journey. Obviously, we know that there is a huge gap in learning in terms of sometimes gender, but most often in terms of socioeconomic status. Students from poor families, students from rural and remote locations start their schooling career with a severe disadvantage compared to their middle and upper class peers. Often these students have not picked up the basic academic skills, ways of speaking, ways of thinking, which their middle and upper class peers have picked up from their home environment. At the individual level, every student has their unique talents and interests. They also learn at different paces. And hence, the implication for curriculum is that the curriculum needs to encourage and help teachers to teach adaptively, to cater for the needs of individual students. So we need to design somehow a curriculum that provides a lot of freedom for teachers to make decisions about learning materials, about the sequence of learning, about the methods of teaching. We need, and schools need to provide and support teacher autonomy and continuous learning with regards to curriculum adaptation. Also, the curriculum needs to provide a lot of room for students themselves to select and formulate what and how they should learn in schools. Okay, well, I will end there, and hopefully this provides some points for us to discuss. Thank you.
Anino, that was fantastic. I think going through your presentation has given us a very grounded way of looking at curriculum reform. And I think the first thing that comes to me is that getting an education is far beyond just learning a few skills. It's an ongoing process, and there are so many factors that need to be built in, which creates the character of a nation. So that is essentially the gist of your presentation. And I also see that the balance that you talk about that has to be tugged at. It's a constantly changing balance, and the balance will be different in different parts of the country, depending on how the culture and people adapt to their life around there. So I think this is a great starting point, and I would actually now try to create a conversation among all three of our panelists. The questions would be posed actually not just to one, but I would like you all to jump in and add your viewpoint so that it becomes a lively interaction between three of us, because I think we bring different perspectives to the table. So I'll kick it off with the first question. Actually, you mentioned that the curriculum is constantly being upgraded, and you have a framework which you just presented. But what is the starting point? I'm saying today, what is the starting point? I'm sure if you looked at it tomorrow, you have a different starting point, and next year you'll start differently. What are you doing today? How is it being approached right now with the situation you're facing? There's a pandemic. There are other challenges thrown at you. What is your starting point today,
The starting point I already mentioned actually is to think about curriculum design from the student's perspective.
Correct.
Of all the various stakeholders that has a say in curriculum design, the student voice is almost always missing.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, what needs to be given more room, taken more seriously in curriculum design. Right? Whatever the context, yes, we have a pandemic, but even without a pandemic, that is true that students are the subject of education, and hence we need to think about what they need. What kind of curriculum would they need for their future? That is my starting point, Pak Sahin.
I think that's fantastic. We've had this discussion earlier in the education forum where we listen to everybody, but we never listen to the end customer. That is the student. So that's a great thing. SHWETA, do you want to add a little bit about how would India be looking at this particular aspect?
Sure. Thanks, Sachin. First of all, I have to comment on, I think you spoke about the socio-political aspect of curriculum framing, which I've seen very few people in very few countries talk about. So my compliments for bringing that out, because we do feel it's a very, very essential component. Coming on to how India has gone through their entire curriculum framework, or the new national education policy, which got announced in 2020, again in the midst of the pandemic. Couple of things. A, the need to constantly revise, the need to get a student's voice in, because at the end of the day, the young generation is extremely smart and savvy, and they are consuming knowledge in a very different manner than the previous generation to them. So to understand that becomes extremely important. Also, the study place has changed. They're studying in a different environment. They're getting their knowledge from multiple zones. So when India was reframing its curriculum, it looked at certain aspects. It looked at interoperability between subjects, so which we typically picked up 3 key strata, which was music, sports, and artificial intelligence, and how all 3 of them would apply in conjunction to improve learning outcomes across other subjects. So it is whether you're teaching a poem in English or maybe even the local language as in Hindi, how do you really use the artificial intelligence to improve the learning outcome, or a tool of AI to improve the learning outcome while trying to figure out what that poem is all about. Or if you're teaching mathematics, of course, it has a direct connection with math and science, but similarly for sports, similarly for music. And they called in a lot of these voices together. They created a body of knowledge as to what the old curriculum is, what should the new curriculum look like. And what I really like is they fast-tracked the implementation of the new curriculum on a test bed, certain number of schools, and studied the impact. So it wasn't that it's got created and it'll take another 5 years to revise and come back with a new curriculum. It was being revised as it was being created, as the changes were made. There was constant feedback given within the system itself to see how would teachers and students react to these new verticals which are being introduced. Another important part, which Sachin, I'll just take a minute to mention, is how countries like India, Korea, and now in fact Taiwan recently is doing is introducing new age technologies, emerging technologies as artificial intelligence as a skill subject, which means as a child, if I'm in grade 8, I can study a biology, a physics, a mathematics. I can also pick up AI as a subject, or I can pick up technology as a subject, or I can pick up psychology as a subject. So that choice, I think, which Panino, which you spoke about, giving the choice and making it extremely modular in approach is something which all the new revisions which we've seen countries going forward with are keeping in mind. Thank you. Back to you, Sachin.
Thank you, SHWETA. In fact, we have Professor Johannes LINDNER who has joined us. Welcome, Professor. Thank you for being here. I think you're following the conversation. We are looking at having some input on are we listening to the youth in getting inputs for how we look at upgrading the curriculum. And Professor Johannes actually here is an expert on entrepreneurial curriculum. He has been with the EU and in his home country works with the Ministry of introducing curriculum for young people to be job creators. And I think it's an important component because to be a job creator, you need a wide variety of skills, and the education framework becomes even more important because the reason to become an entrepreneur are many. Some want to make money, some want to change economic change for their society. Some are just innovators and they just want to see a product out in the market. So different kind of people become entrepreneurs. So I think this very well fits into this conversation. So Professor, maybe a quick input from you. How do you talk to your youth when you design your curriculum? Do you see the young people being consulted? What has been your approach? Over to you, Professor.
Thanks a lot. I think on the first point, it's important always to speak, what do you mean with a curriculum? When we speak about the syllabus, we have a very diverse situation of syllabuses. In our country, we have a primary education, one syllabus for the whole age group between 6 up to 10. Then we have one syllabus between 10 up to 14. But after that, we have 500 different syllabuses in my country. We have a very diverse situation of a lot of possibilities from the student perspective to choose different ways where they like to go. That's one point. The second point, when we are creating a syllabus, we always are doing an evaluation study in the beginning, which is going on the one hand to the students back when they are behind 5 or 10 years when they were going through the school. And we also go to the labor market, particularly for the age group in the secondary upper level between 14 up to 19. This evaluation study is always a crucial point to check is the syllabus from the student perspective and from the labor market perspective an acceptable approach how it is now. For the 21st century, we also made strategy approaches. Inside the European Union, we have filtered out that there are 8 key competences which each citizen should learn inside school or later. And there are some points inside which are totally new, which were never a part of the syllabus. Or maybe not, you didn't see it so much. It was more a question of methodic maybe. And as you mentioned, entrepreneurial learning is one of the points. It's the key competence number 70, that each student, when he passed through the school, he should be able to be a shaper, to be an entrepreneur, to change the society and to know how to do this. This has a lot to do with the questions, how can I participate in my society? How do I get a passion? And this, the 8 key competence model is a very important point for all changes inside the syllabuses in our countries. And we also use a lot the 21st century research which the American was doing. There's also something very comparable to the European one, where you have 4 elements inside, and where we see they also call some points as total new approaches. And we see we have to change our syllabus much more than we ever were expecting. And it's not so much oriented with digital, because digital you can do in all subjects. It's much more with the questions how we are learning. This is the crucial point. Can we give our learners the possibility that they take over a partly responsibility? And they start with that in primary education and going up. As one of the previous speakers were mentioned, learning is not easy. I have a different opinion. I think when you find a good way of learning, it's very easy. And it's not always that you need to learn hard, that you have the feeling that you learn something. That's it's an important point to see. But I agree totally with that. It's very important to go deep in some areas. But it's particularly important that you are able to use your knowledge. When you only learn knowledge and you are not able to use it, you lack a tremendous point. And I think that's quite a problem of many school syllabuses, that they are very content-oriented, knowledge-oriented, and that they are missing the handling, the use, the skill aspect, and the attitude aspect. And we can learn a lot from the sport syllabus. In sport, you always had this insight that you have a training aspect and you have a coaching aspect. And I think it's very smart when we are able to put this also in the syllabus of some other subjects, that our teachers see they have a knowledge and a skill aspect, but they are, the American call this character, the European call this attitude, that we have something to develop the personality. I think that's important to see. We have 3 aspects which are always important. Knowledge, it's very classic. Some things are totally new in this knowledge area. We have the point how we can use it, handle it, skills aspects. And the third one is how can we support that our students get a good attitude, a good character. And I like a lot, as the previous speaker mentioned, it's so important to be student oriented, because many students do have very different chances inside the family. And we have some students where the family cannot support the learning process. So the school have to take over this, in particular for the attitude point, that they have a self-esteem and development and things like that. Fantastic. I think that's for the point, fine.
So you make a good point. Actually, this broad philosophy, Professor Johannes, can be applied across the board. I completely get where you're coming from. Thanks for sharing that insight. Ibu Inge, I want to ask you actually, because you have this big program where you're interacting with teachers and you're preparing the teachers to interact with students. Are you able to also create a reverse flow of feedback from the students to the teachers, which you're able to use effectively for getting inputs to how you recommend, upgrading curriculum?
From our interaction, in fact, the problem of curriculum is implementation. We have to change the mindset of our teachers. Okay. Because before, they are like it is said, they are automated. So teaching thinking skill is not as easy as teaching practical skill. Yeah. You can show, and then the student can imitate you, and then that's all. Teaching thinking needs for the teacher to make the thinking process of the student visible. Yeah. So it takes time, and we have difficulty with this period of distance learning,
Yeah,
it's not easy to teach thinking skill with only distance learning like now. But we try to overcome with small group. And this is our difficulty with the teachers. But when I introduce unplugged activities, it reduces the fear of the teacher who are not having enough infrastructure, because they thought always computational thinking. Oh, it's computer. I have no computer. I don't know ICT. So we introduce that this is the thinking skill. It's not only about technology. And from the children's side, it is, I'm very glad that by small exercise like BeBras, the children told us, oh, for the first time, I have to solve a problem without thinking with whether it is mathematics, it is physics. Our goal is to solve a problem. Oh, I like it very much that the children love our BeBras stuff because of I don't know, funny, and then they don't feel they learn single subject. I think in this aspect, BeBras can cover a transferable skill that Pak Nino said.
Okay. So coming back to you, Pak Nino, I think, the message is clear. This is something that is put everybody's thinking cap on, because so many aspects of this has to be handled in different ways. So I wanted to ask you, Pa, you in your presentation, you talked about a lot of soft angles of the curriculum, like you talked about human, social, and environmental aspects that need to be there, compassion, collaboration, global competence. So many different moving pieces are there, Pa. What is your approach? Is this built into a separate subject, or are they built into each and every subject? How do you see such kind of agendas being built in so that students are actually imbibing and learning, and it's not just a subject by itself? What is the approach, Pa? I think, Panino, you're on silent. You're on muted. Just check your. Yes.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, Pa, clear.
Okay. All right, so the question was about the approach that we should take in developing student competencies, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Theoretically, there are two approaches: infusion and developing it explicitly through activities that are designed specifically for those competencies. And I think we should take both approaches. It's not an either-or proposition. Subject matter teaching has to teach basic competencies as well. I mean, the passion to read is not just the language teacher's job to develop. I mean, teachers teaching religious studies, teaching history, teaching science, it's also their job to develop students' skills in reading and also their passion for the world of text and imagery. Right? And
Yeah.
the same applies to different competencies, problem solving. It's not just the job of the mathematics teacher or the science teacher to do that. It's every teacher's job to develop those basic competencies. However, we also need to recognize the difficulty of teaching basic competencies while also teaching for content knowledge, which subject matter teachers have to do as well. And hence the curriculum needs to allow activities that are more unstructured, more open, more collaborative. And these project-based activities should be designed specifically to develop the kinds of competencies that we want students to develop. I
So,
hope that answers the question.
No, you're absolutely right, Panino. The question I actually want to bounce off Ibu Inga's comment was, you can do this, but how do you get the teachers to be able to train? I'm saying, what's the process of teaching teachers to be able to do this consistently across? Because that's a different challenge. I know it's not under your directorate, but you have to work with, let's say, with Ivan, right?
Yes.
So how does that happen? I'm saying, what is the interplay between your different directorates?
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on Bu Inga's point about teacher mindset. That is obviously key, right? And one of the basic mindsets that we need to change is about how teachers view their own agency as autonomous actors within the education system. Right?
Yes.
We know that many of our teachers lack the sufficient competencies to teach, content knowledge, pedagogical skills, and so on, and mindset about teaching. In previous approaches, the government has tended to take control back from teachers because they see that, oh, it's not working. Giving autonomy to teachers and schools is not working. And then the intuition is to, okay, let's give them more instruction then. Let's be more structured. Give them more regulations to follow. And we believe that's the wrong approach, because then when will the teachers start to learn to become autonomous agents, to become masters of their own course of learning as teachers? So we have to start somewhere, but we recognize that we need to provide a lot of scaffolding. And that's what all of this guru penggerak, sekolah penggerak, SMK, Pusat Keunggulan is all about, is providing scaffolds for teachers to take on the mantle of course designers.
Yeah.
It's not about just imparting what the government wants them to teach. They actually need to think about the learning objectives, how to achieve those objectives within the context of their own classroom and their students.
Thank you. Thank you, Panino. I'm going to go to SHWETA. Actually, this question is to you about, you've been doing this program for youth in India and in many other places. And I know you've just completed a pilot project with the youth in Indonesia with, I think, 14 different provinces. Kids came across and did AI project, which is basically project-based learning. The question I have for you, SHWETA, is that, kids are all born into the technology world. All these kids are native digital. They're born with handphones in their homes. And when you introduce these kind of new topics to them and new ways of teaching, what's the reaction? What's the general receptivity of youth to these kinds of new programs, which may not be in the formal curriculum yet, but they are going towards, things that they like to do and they're familiar with, etc. Some input from you, SHWETA?
So I think one general common understanding across all the countries, all the 15 countries where our programs are, kids love it. And I'm not saying that because we are program managing it, but we're interacting with it. But just let me give you an idea, right? There are 6 children from India who've actually filed a patent. Yesterday was the International IP Day, the Global IP Day. And there are 6 children who filed a patent, and their projects are ranging on how do you really help people with autism to communicate better in real time, to how do you really predict the right usage model for generating power across a developing economy. Now, these are ideas which only, as you said, children, youth of this age who have access to the right skill sets, to the right tool sets, who can think of. Indonesia is extremely creative. Even when we were working with the makers in Indonesia, with SMKs, what we realized was that the projects which we got out of Indonesia were incomparable. We still have those case studies which have created waves on the global stage. And they all come from far corners, remote corners, as remote as South Sulawesi, across the country. Stories which are very heartwarming, which have a social impact, which would really be advantageous to the community at large. So children really adapt well to it, but surprisingly, even teachers are doing that today. See, there was an era when we were all talking about how technology in education was a struggle for most of the teachers. But today, the silver lining of this ongoing pandemic, I guess, is that teachers have realized that that is become an essential component of their lives. They are relating well to it. They knew that technology will keep evolving, will keep changing. They're exchanging lesson plans across the globe. We did a youth summit which had participants from almost 100 countries, which is unbelievable, where educators come together and they share best practices, they share their lesson plans, they share their teaching methodologies, they share their thought processes. Youth come and share their practices. So that kind of, I would say, collaboration is only possible on digital platforms, and that is how it is working. But the response has been great. And anything new is exciting. Professional development is a must for teachers. Investing in developing their capacities is equally essential if you want to make something scalable and sustainable. And that can be any subject. It's not just artificial intelligence. It can be design thinking, computational thinking, algorithmic thinking, even basic skill sets of leadership. So there needs to be a lot of investment which a country needs to make in developing capacities of the teachers, of their educators, in order to ensure that it becomes completely scalable across the country as a solution.
Yeah. Shweta, in fact, I have seen how Intel does some of its training. It creates a very fun work environment for kids, fun learning environment. They play games and they see animations. I guess that's one way to relate something difficult to them by bringing it down to a level that they understand. So that's great input, Shweta. I'm going to go to Professor Johannes. Professor Johannes, one of the things, the challenges of countries like India, Indonesia, developing nations is, it's not often that somebody becomes an entrepreneur by choice. In many cases, they learn entrepreneurship out of necessity, and they are thrown into a world where they have to create a job for themselves because maybe the industry is not producing the kind of jobs they trained for. It's a complex answer. But it actually is a positive thing because, many of these economies have been built by these grassroots entrepreneurs. They are the ones who have really created the engine of economy in their little towns and villages, and they're powering on. So I feel giving them the right skills of entrepreneurship to do it the right way, to scale up, to learn new things, will really empower a nation because it's not actually a negative thing. It's actually a positive thing. If there are people want to learn skills to create economic value, we must find a way to engage with them and give them the right skills. So I know this for Indonesia, the position is different. From EU, the countries, the situation may be different. Any inputs from you, Professor Johannes, about how entrepreneurship can be embedded early into children's minds with the syllabus or maybe any other methodology? Over to you, Professor.
Thank you. I stress this point a lot because I'm coming from a country which is very rich today. Yes. But in the past, it was not rich. We were a very poor country. And we had periods where there was a tremendous war and all was destroyed. Therefore, I think when we speak about a modern style of learning, it doesn't mean automatically digital and so on. A modern style of learning is that we make open-minded persons, that we give the students the possibility to be creative and innovative in many cases. It's an attitude development. And this attitude development needs to start in primary learning, when we want that our students later on take over responsibility and are able to handle larger challenges. Therefore, we support a challenge-based learning. Like our colleague before mentioned the problem-based learning, I prefer challenge-based learning, and you need to start this very early. And therefore, I also like a lot what the colleague before mentioned. In the syllabus, you need to bring some experimental things inside, like fix a project each year. A week where in the design of the syllabus is mentioned, in this week, everybody is allowed to do a project. because then you will have a lot of teachers who will be creative what you are using with these possibilities when you are thinking out of the box in the way of syllabus. I like also that each teacher needs to take over basic competencies, but we have learned it's important that you have to write down cross-disciplinary competences, and you also have to link it to some subjects. Otherwise, you have maybe written down things in the syllabus which are very modern, but no one is responsible really for that. Because when you say everyone is responsible, sometimes it means no one is responsible. I also would like to bring one more line. When you develop a syllabus, it's also important to see how you're doing your assessment. How is the assessment culture in a country? Because the assessment has a tremendous effect about the openness of a syllabus, about the way how you can make an interpretation of the syllabus. And when you have a fixed assessment, which is very knowledge-based oriented, you destroy all this openness and these possibilities. We have in some subjects written down, the students have to do a project. This is a part of the assessment. And our final examination, each student has to do a project. It's a part of our final examination. It's a total different approach. It was a long development. It was not a jump, but I think this has nothing to do with be a rich or a poor country. This has more to do with the point that you experiment some things, because to make a project is not cost intensive. I think there are some things which we are easily able to share, and we are doing this also in many countries. And it's important to find things where you see you can share creative and innovative approaches which everyone can use. Doesn't matter do you have the infrastructure, or maybe sometimes you have a larger group. Because we are working with some Asian countries where the students are 50 in the class, which is unbelievable for us because our largest number is 25, but still with 50 people, with some circumstances, you can do a lot. And of course, with digital elements, you can jump to several things, but it's cost intensive. But in some cases, it's worth to invest this money.
Thank you, Professor. I'm actually going to jump to Panino. Would you like to react to that, Panino?
Yeah, Pak Sahin, I was going to jump in. You read my body language very well. Very much agree, Professor. That's why in Indonesia, one of the first things we did in the ministry was to get rid of Ujian Nasional, the national examination, which is a content-based high-stakes exam for all students in grades 9 and 12. We also got rid of a content-based exam, regional exams at grade 6, 9, and 12. And that's precisely because we know that teaching and learning is driven by what is assessed at the end of the day. And we are replacing that with a national assessment, which we hope would reorient teachers to teach towards developing basic competencies instead of going wide and knowing a lot of knowledge, but useless, as you say, inert knowledge. What good would it be for them outside of the school exam? So yes, Pak Sahin, completely agree. Assessment is key there. You cannot separate assessment and curriculum. But yeah, the challenge, I also agree that we need to encourage assessment of project-based learning, but that is much more difficult than establishing a standardized assessment at the national level. And because this means yeah.
Yes, I got you. Panino, I just want to ask, because we are running out of time, I'm going to close in the next 2-3 minutes. I wanted your last view on, Pa Mantri this morning had mentioned that, they are actually undertaking a data project of using technology actually to get inputs that will help the ministry. And it's a big data project, though he says he doesn't call it a big data project, but essentially it's the first time big data is being used to make an assessment of the entire system across all different aspects. So using technology to refine curriculum is a fantastic way of, identifying early what are the pressure points or the pain points, and finding, therefore creative solutions which are based not on just, gut feel or opinion, but really based on data. Would you like to say something about that, what you're doing? Because I know that you've been very much involved in this.
Yeah, what Pak Menteri was saying is actually the national assessment. We are redesigning from the bottom up, really, the way the education system is evaluated at the moment. And as Pak Menteri said, we are putting student learning front and center of it. So what we consider good schools are schools that are successful in developing student character and competencies. The kinds of competencies that I mentioned and Pak Wikan mentioned as the profil pelajar Pancasila, right? Creativity, problem solving, critical thinking, ethical thinking, and so on. And we do that by going into schools and getting a sample of students from each schools and assessing their literacy, numeracy, and all of those characters. But on top of that, we are also asking students about what they think in terms of the quality of teaching and learning and the school as a learning environment, their school as a learning environment. And this is what I meant by asking the student, getting the student's voice in the process of evaluating curriculum reform and educational reform more broadly. So for the first time next year or the end of this year, we will have students' perspective about the quality of teaching and learning, the quality of the learning environment, how safe is their schools, how inclusive do they think their schools are, right? From the students' perspective, not only from the teachers and principals' perspective. And just adding one more thing, we are also collecting data from teacher platform. So Pak Menteri has a separate team developing an education super app, if you will. Right? Hopefully, when teachers across Indonesia use this app, we will be able to collect real-time data about the kinds of toolkits that they value. Right? How much time they spend in teaching topics A, topics B, topics C, and so on. And this is obviously the initial phase of the development, but fingers crossed.
That's fantastic. Panino, next year when we do the Education Forum Annual, we definitely want you to be there to, give us an update on what's coming out of this new study. In fact, Professor Johannes, we have 560,000 schools in Indonesia, and there are more than 50 million students. So you can imagine what kind of rich data that will come through. There are 5 million teachers. It's a huge system. It's the 4th largest education system in the world. So I'm really looking forward to these inputs, Panino, and we're very honored to have you here today. All my panelists, SHWETA, Professor Johannes, Ibu Inger, thank you so much for being here today. We'll continue this conversation because we have the Education Forum having monthly roundtables, and we take up different topics at every time, and we'll definitely be great to have you, Panino, on one of the roundtables where we can, probably do a little deep dive into something else that you may find of value to interact with the others.
Sure,
Thank you so much to all our panelists, and I'm going to hand this over to to Pashoeb back in the studio.
Thank you, Sachin, and thank you to the panelists. A great discussion. I think we've seen as the day has unfolded, we have gone deeper and deeper into some of the key topics surrounding the education sector.